All right, so let's get back to artificial intelligence. When last we left, we asked the question whether machines could think and considered some objections to the positive version of that. And so now we're going to respond, saying maybe the objections to strong general artificial intelligence are inconclusive. So if you remember the translation room, the person in the room that's looking at the symbols and looking through the manual and then putting out a symbol into the output doesn't seem to understand what's going on. Well, some people have pointed out that that's actually a problem. It's like it's like Searle just took out the heart and said, "Hey, look, the heart by itself, without any of the like things connected to it, doesn't pump blood very well." Well, no, that's not like a machine works when all of it works. You have to explain how the room was able to read um, the input, gather the input, and produce the output, and have the translation book in there so that the person in the room could just look it up, right? Um, the whole room is the analogy to a computer program. It's not the person in the room. It's not the little tickety-tock thing that moves around. It's not like you can ask whether a gear in a clock can tell the time. It's the wrong question. Searle anticipates this response, and he has a counter response. And he says, okay, well, assume I had a module inside me that was able to process Chinese. Would that mean that I understood Chinese? So in essence, going in the reverse direction. Instead of going into the machine, you zoom out. You say, oh, there's a part of me that just like zooms in. There's some people that actually just say, yeah, yeah, you do. You do understand Chinese with that module. That's like, do you understand all of the things your mind does? But, well, this is his response. Okay. There are some people that say that part of the problem with the machine metaphor is that it is far too cognitive. It's just input, output, and verbal. And in fact, most of the things that we do, most of the ways that human intelligence works involve interacting with the world. So we'll be getting into the embodied, enacted, whatever, accounts of cognition later on in the semester, probably in a couple of months. But the basic idea is the kinds of things that a machine does just aren't understanding. This translation room is a completely stable room, and you need to imagine it moving around in the world. That would be the better analogy. So Searle's response to this is kind of clever. What is moving around add to a machine? But the people that advocate for an embodied approach to cognition say that's all the difference in the world. We'll spend quite a bit of time on that later on in the semester. That there are some things that seem like they might require cognition, they might require thinking, that actually don't, and vice versa. The moving around matters. There's a bunch of other responses, right? So one of these is, okay, suppose we could simulate all the synapses and everything else. Then that is a completely computer type approach that has completely represented a human brain, and presumably that one must be intelligent, therefore a computer could be intelligent without simulating the brain. Another is an evolutionary response that says, hey, there's no reason that we humans should be able to understand, except that we do. and natural selection has been operating on us for millions of years. So since natural selection is this guessing and checking mechanism over millions of years, presumably nature, if it could have made us philosophical zombies, if it could have made us things that could process the world without understanding it, it would have, but it gave us sentience. It gave us as animals the ability to understand and feel and pain and pleasure and experience the world. Therefore, there must be something that follows from, there must be some deep connection between processing and understanding. All right, you didn't like the room, Searle. You said that this is an analogous. Well, okay, we can make a bigger room that was much more complicated, and it would have all of the things that you think the translation room lacks. Cool. Another objection is, well, simulation just is a approximation. That's what it means to simulate something. And so if a computer is simulating a room, or sorry, if a computer is simulating understanding, then eventually it'll get close enough, and that just might be what we experience as reality. That goes back to some of the earlier objections in the previous section. And then the last one is the trite, well, you don't know that you have a mind either, or that I have a mind. Cool. Does Searle have responses to these? Yes. All right. So in the first case, Searle's going to question some version of it, right? So if the simulator is simulating every synapse, it's got to be simulating them in the right sort of ways. And if it's not simulating them in the right sort of ways, then you're begging the question, you're presuming the answer. The whole point of the computer was that it was going to be analogous without having to have any of the wetware that we have. Then, all right. Searle thinks humans are special, and we'll figure out why we evolved that way eventually. As a philosopher of biology, I think that is the shittiest response, but whatever, okay? Move on. Many mentions, Searle responds, I think rightly, so that this is a cop-out. I think a lot of these arguments go back and forth, and maybe when we get to the future, we won't ever be able to create something that fully resembles humans, human intelligence in any way, human understanding. But I don't know. Then we'll have different arguments then. Searle does not believe simulations just are reality. And he thinks that if we knew more, we wouldn't believe it either. And then the last one. You don't know that we have minds. All right, way to be a jerk. Really helpful. So the question was, is the Chinese room, sorry, the translation room, analogous to a Turing machine? You've got the input, which is Q1 in the Turing machine, input in the translation room. You've got the rule ledger M in the Turing machine. You got the output, which is the machine head. You've got the real world S2, right? How analogous is it? But one of Searle's responses was against the setup, right? Against, in his response to the many mansions and to the brain simulator, he said, well, that's presuming we could create a system like that. You could just throw this back at him and say, we're all debating whether machines could fool us. Could you set up something like Searle's translation room in a complicated enough way to pass a Turing test? Who knows? I think to help me think about the way I like to think about this, I like Daniel Dennett's approach in taking particular stances with respect to how we understand the world. Sometimes we think about the world in psychological terms. Why did Sally push Johnny? Because she was mad at him. Sometimes we take design stances. This is a biological or engineering approach. Why are Sally's hands good for pushing? Other times we ask physical questions. Why did Johnny fall? And Dennett points out that the very same phenomenon you could express in different ways. You could express the cat sitting on your lap and understand it in intentional design or physical versions. I'm reminded of a time when my friend spilled water on his phone and it started like sending text messages and calling friends and hanging up randomly. And he stopped thinking about it as a machine and started thinking about it as a phone that hated him. He started taking the intentional stance toward it. And in fact, we do this. We do this all the time. This is a very anti-realist approach that all intentionality is derived. Whether something actually intends is because we don't understand the design or physical explanations well enough, or those explanations just aren't at the right level of analysis for the questions we're asking. We're asking intentional questions. So if natural selection could design our minds, then you could construct a physical system, engineer it in such a way that it might behave in intentional ways. And that's just all there is to it. There's nothing deeper to be found. There's no deep truth about how intelligent we are, according to Dennett. And then lastly, sometimes the best objection is just to like make fun of the person's argument. So if the translation room is an argument from analogy, let's take another analogy and see where it goes. Programs are purely formal, minds have mental content, formal structure is not sufficient for mental content, therefore programs aren't sufficient for minds. Recipes are formal, they're just instructions on paper. Cakes are crumbly. Formal structures aren't sufficient for crumbliness, therefore a recipe is not sufficient for a cake. It's not, you have to actually do it. And insofar as this is an analogous argument, you can kind of see where something went wrong. That said, some of the smartest people in the world are completely convinced by the translation room argument that strong artificial general intelligence is impossible, at least without simulating some other deeper facets of human biology. So, all right. That was the physical symbol systems hypothesis, language of thoughts, artificial intelligence. Now we're going to try a very different approach, and that's going to be the next video. We're going to go into connectionism.